Greetings. My name is Māhealani Uchiyama, Director of the Center for International Dance. Welcome to Dare, Conversations in the Diaspora. Dare is a production of the African American Mbira Project, an initiative to perpetuate the music and tradition of the Mbira within the African American community. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I reside in the Bay Area, a land contemporarily known as Ohlone Territory. There are 8 language dialects and many active tribal groups. With Dare, we aspire to explore the music of Zimbabwe and other performance traditions which exist in the diaspora. Our conversations with artists will focus on their art form and their personal journey. In addition, you will have a chance to ask questions of our guests. Zena Carlota is an author, expressive arts therapy trainee, and founder of Ancestral Arts Therapy, a multi-instrumentalist, a composer, singer, and storyteller who is inspired by the Jaliya music tradition of West Africa. She has spent almost 2 decades traveling the US, West Africa, and Europe studying the kora, a 21-string bridge harp that originates from the Malian Empire of the 13th century. Please welcome Zena Carlota.
Hi, thank you, Māhealani. Thank you for having me.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Zena. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, some of our viewers may not be very familiar with the kora. Could you please tell us a little bit about the kora and what it means to you?
That's a good question. Thank you. So the kora is a 21-string bridge harp. It originates from the Malian Empire during the 13th century, and that's what's presently known as Gambia, as the Gambia today. Music in the Jaliya tradition was composed of the balafon and the kora and then the ngoni, and it was kind of like this triad of instruments that worked in concert with each other. And these instruments were played by court musicians of the Malian Empire and of the Malian Kingdom. And so in this way, like, music not only had a purpose of entertainment, but it was much deeper than that. It had a utilitarian purpose, which was to hold memory and to hold story. And we find that so often, like in traditional music forms, in traditional dance forms, in traditional art forms, that it's a form of storytelling. And so in the Jaliya tradition, you have griots. These were, on the male side, were men who traditionally played these instruments, and then on the female side were women who traditionally played, who sung. And these songs and these stories and these music traditions were passed down within specific families over generations. And in terms of my personal connection to it, I mean, I think I first fell in love with the kora sonically. I didn't know what the instrument was. I didn't know where its origin came from. I just knew that I felt connected to it. And it's been really beautiful to learn about the legacy of like string music and classical music within West Africa, because we so often think of drums and of percussion as kind of being the only form of music that comes out of the continent. And it's so much more diverse than that.
Amazing. Who were your first teachers?
My first teacher his name was Baba. His name is Baba. He goes by Baba the Storyteller, and he was African American. And I found him in LA, and he had also studied in Mali with Tumani Jabate and had studied in the Gambia. And so after probably about 4 or 5 months of spending time with him, he sent me to West Africa to study with his teachers.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Is he still teaching? Do you know?
I don't know that Baba is still teaching. I know that he's an avid storyteller and he travels around the world telling stories, but I'm not sure if he's continued teaching.
So were you first attracted, I mean, sonically you say, but was the
Yeah.
storytelling as much a part of that first awareness and attraction for you with the kora?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that time when I came into it, I don't think that I would never have identified myself as being a storyteller.
Mm,
So I realized that that was the heart of what I loved, which was folklore and mythology, and then how that weaves into dance and how that weaves into visual art and how that weaves into music. That's kind of like the bloodline and the lifeline through all the things I do, but I didn't have the language for it at that time.
mhm, mhm,
Um, so I wouldn't have called myself a storyteller, but what I appreciated is in learning the kora, which is very different from going to like a traditional music school, which I did for a very, very short period of time before dropping out, um, is that before I would learn any of the music, I had to learn the story first. And so that's the way that I was taught, is that I had to know the context. I had to understand why people sung it, why it was being carried, why it was important. And then once I understood that, then I could learn the actual like melody and the composition of the song.
that contextualizing of an understanding of why something exists is, I think, a big part of what makes this kind of music so alive for me and so precious and so interesting.
Yeah,
You
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it holds. It's kind of like think of like rock formations and
know?
sediments, and there's many, many layers, and so sometimes I think in more contemporary music we just get the top layer, but then we don't get to see like all of the roots that exist underneath. And I think that kora music and other traditional art forms can give you access to the deeper meaning.
Mhm, mhm. It makes all the difference, I think, in how one experiences the music.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners about the Jaliya tradition and what is the significance of it and how the kora fits into that.
Yeah. Um, so the Jaliya tradition, as I kind of touched on a little bit earlier, oh, I'm so sorry. The Jaliya tradition is a tradition from West Africa where you have specific families who are essentially holding the legacy and the lineage of music and of history
Mhm,
and of memory and of story. And that is through verbally sung songs, that is through music compositions. Um, and the griots, who are the people who are like the active participants and the holders in the Jaliya tradition, men and women, um, they are the keepers of the history, of the
mhm,
culture. Um, and so, like I said, the stories get woven into songs, they get woven into music compositions, they get woven into dance. Um, but in the Jaliya tradition specifically,
mhm.
they held a really important role within the royal society, because they were the record keepers. And so they were the people that they could sing the song of the king's, father and grandfather and great great grandfather and great 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 grandfather, and they would memorize, the family lineages and all of the names of all the people that came before. They would memorize the stories of specific battles, and tell you the context of why something happened. So um, although there might be like some like folklore and mythology like woven into the Jaliya traditions,
Mm.
I would say at its core, essentially, they really they really are historians, at their core.
And this history, the sense of it, so the fact that they were the historians of their people
Mm,
would definitely place them in a status where they would have a certain amount of respect, I would imagine.
I mean, I think historically that's true. I'm not sure that they are given the same nowadays as society has like shifted and changed. I don't I don't think that they're elevated or exalted to the same level that they maybe deserve or or could be. In the age of Google, you know, having people having keeping the oral tradition alive. You kind of get to see like kind of the more old traditions and how they intersect with with new modern technology and how we can record keep and how we can store things now. Um, and so I think that the role in society of of the griots does shift um, as we as our world transforms.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, what about your path here? What kind of challenges have or advantages have
Yeah.
you encountered, yeah, in your participation in this tradition as an American woman?
Mm. I mean, what I feel like in some ways I've been really fortunate. I've had some really beautiful teachers that have held me and supported me and encouraged me, um, and and maybe even shielded me from
Mm,
any sort of like criticism or like feedback because women don't traditionally play the kora. Women are the singers, so they do play a significant role, but it's in voice rather than in being an instrumentalist. And so in some ways I feel like I've been really lucky and like been really shielded. Um, and like that being said, uh, I've also, kind of been on the periphery to witness, like what what can happen when culture starts to shift or change, or some people want access that haven't traditionally had access before, and the beauty that that can create, and then also maybe sometimes the tension that that can create in terms of power dynamics and who's let in, right, and who's given access, and then like who's kind of left out. um
can you give us
and
an example?
yeah, I'm almost hesitant to. um I I would say, well, I'll talk about. I'm not going to delve into all of like the gender dynamics because like those are significant and they are real. Um, but one of the things that was really significant to me was noticing not just the context of me being an American woman, but me being an African American woman and a Black American woman. Um, and what I've seen is in traveling to West Africa and traveling to Europe and in the States. Uh, there actually are more and more significant numbers of women playing, but they are not Black,
Mm,
right? Um, and that's not to say that there's not any Black women players. There definitely are. They're on the continent. There's some that are in Europe. There are some that are in the United States. But I would say, as a whole, we see a lot more women coming into the genre, into the field, into the cultural community that might have access to resources or might have access to a certain kind of education that allows them to maybe go and study, and be like supported to study for a few years overseas, abroad with the teachers that they want to study with. And I think it's been interesting for me seeing some of the people that might be like kind of the cultural inheritors of of the legacy of kora music and of the Jaliya tradition, who are Black, who are living and thriving in the African diaspora, and finding that they don't necessarily have the same access because they don't necessarily have the same resources. And so that's something that has I've seen more and more of, and I'm definitely aware of.
that's very much the case in the Bira community as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just want to take this moment just to invite any of our audience members, if you'd like to submit a question to Zena, go ahead and post it in the comments section of wherever you're watching, and we will be happy to receive it and to pass it along. I remember you talking about your family and how they instilled a sense of pride in you.
Mm,
And I would really love for you to share a little bit about that.
yeah. Well, my mom is an anthropologist and my dad is a historian, and the work that they do in the world is around like sustaining and supporting Black culture, like throughout the diaspora, and and gender equality and and empowerment. So I feel like having that as a foundation was just kind of um, there was a love and an appreciation and an honoring of our African American culture, but then also like our greater relationship to the continent of Africa and the diaspora. And so I was definitely raised by Pan Africanists, and and it wasn't conscious. I didn't actively like necessarily like seek out um in terms of my relationship with the kora, like I didn't actively like seek out to like study a West African instrument specifically, but I felt really supported and like in doing so. And yeah, I think that I think my parents just always really like instilled a sense of like our relationship and our relatedness to other people, um, across cultures, but within the diaspora.
Mhm. Some would say that, I mean, just by virtue of the fact that we are here in this time and place, African Americans by default are Pan African, right?
Hmm.
Because of our our history, our ancestry, the fact that we've been here for so long and mixing together, it we're already like the natural Pan Africanists. It's just that we don't always seem to know that
Yeah, yeah,
on the conscious level.
yeah. I think that that's true. I think that that's true.
Mm. So you are currently doing some really important work on the with regard to music and its ability to heal
Mhm.
people, its ability to bring ancestral awareness, its ability to engender creativity and
Mhm.
cultural connection, cultural exchange. Could you share a little bit about your work with us?
Yeah, I can. I am in my last 2 months of finishing a
Mm.
master's program in expressive arts therapy and counseling psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. And so for the last 3 years, what I've been studying and within music, but also within movement, also within storytelling, within visual art, writing, um, are like what are the innate healing qualities of the creative acts that are embedded in our cultures, across cultures. What are the things that we rely on to heal, to process information, to like alchemize grief and pain, and then to create hope and to create language, um, to be able to express, where we've been and where we are and where we want to go. And so, you don't have to get a degree to understand that that's what the arts can do. Um, but I was finding when I would play music, sometimes people cry, sometimes people would come up to me and would be so moved, and I was always kind of like a little bit taken aback because I don't think and I didn't feel like it was me. I felt like it was the instrument. And that's not to like disregard myself. And I'm like, well, there's something bigger here that's happening that like I'm not fully aware of. I'm not intentionally facilitating, but it's happening nonetheless. And so I wanted to study and understand what that was. And really what we call art therapy, what we call expressive arts therapy is just like a Western contextualization of the creative traditions that people have been doing for centuries. Um, so when I'm finishing my degree right now, and part of that is kind of visioning for like what are the next steps. And so I feel like my life is first as an artist, as a painter, as a storyteller, as a writer, as a musician, as a songkeeper. That's kind of the foundational level of like of who I am and how I show up in the world. But then the next part is wondering how I can take some of those tools and then use them to build relationships and build community, and to create supportive spaces, especially for people of color, to be able to heal and to feel visible and to feel supported. Um, and so within the time of me completing my degree, one of the next steps is starting my therapy practice, and and a part of that is my work with ancestral arts therapy, which is kind of a project within my therapy practice of wanting to go into communities and support them and like in and affirm them and encourage using like traditional art practices, particularly within the African diaspora, um, and helping to just create an environment where people can, I guess, in a more like intentional way, work through like what might be happening in the community, which I think right now at these times really is a lot of collective grief.
Absolutely.
So that's it's still formulating, so I don't
Mhm.
get all of the language and all the pieces, and I want to be really careful. I'm listening to myself talk, and I'm like, okay, is that exactly it? And I'm like, I'm not totally sure, but it's the seed. It's like the baby seed that's being planted, and we'll see what it goes into.
I mean, I get that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's good to just hear yourself, to be able to really clarify. But I was just thinking, when you were talking about when you performed music and people would just start to cry. I mean, sound is vibration, right? There's, you know, it if you hear this a frequency perhaps that resonates with someone, they may not even be aware that it's happening. I mean,
Yeah.
as a performer, I've actually had that happen as well, where
Yeah.
you're doing something, you're singing a song or you're dancing, and someone in your house begins to just shed tears, and it's 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 an amazing thing,
Yeah.
and it's a powerful thing, and it's also very humbling, I find,
Yeah.
that there's a frequency with which we all seem to resonate, well, maybe in different ways for different people, but it's possible to do that as an
Yeah.
artist, and the potential power that that holds, particularly in a community that it has been through a lot of what is going on right now, in this country, in this time. Our community, other communities as well, and we're definitely in need of that kind of healing power.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that that's, with music and with dance and with writing.
Mhm.
um I mean, what I'm finding is that like there is an understanding that like transcends language, and there is healing, that's possible within that. And I feel like it is definitely humbling, and I'm finding my words. um I think and I think what's been most beautiful to watch for me in this process of like learning these new tools of blending the arts like with Western psychology, is seeing what can be healed and what's possible and what can transform without even having to speak. That there's information that gets carried through sound and that gets carried through movement. And so, which I think just it relates a lot to the Jaliya tradition, which is that like these things are containers of something much more than movement, much more than sound. Like it holds information, and that information can, I think, can create pathways for liberation. Yeah.
Yes. And with regard to getting back to the expression of the kora
Mm-hmm.
and how that might play into all of this.
Yeah.
In terms, I mean, it's a storytelling instrument, right? I mean, it's used in that way already, but how would you perceive your expression of this in a way that is really putting the healing aspect of the music front and center?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I've learned in my time playing is that one, I play differently than like I play differently than I was taught. I play differently than other kora players play. There's a percussiveness and sometimes a rapidness that the kora, the momentum of the sound in kora can take. And I've been very intentional about slowing it down, and kind of aligning with like what is my internal rhythm and like an internal like a patterns of playing. And so for me, the kora has been less about and this kind of relates to how my relationship to making art is changing as I'm becoming like an expressive arts therapist, which is that it's less about the destination and like needing to get somewhere or to create something, and more about like what is the experience of and how does my body feel as I'm playing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and so like how am I experiencing, like what is my relationship to my instrument versus like how can I create like the fastest, most like percussive sound. And
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing wrong with that. I'm very impressed and deeply humbled by people that have the ability to play that way, but I've never really been good at playing that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I never, and so instead of pushing it, I kind of just stopped trying. And I started realizing that I wanted to make different kinds of sound. And so, I mean, I think my relationship to my instrument right now has been changing a lot over the past like 5 years. I think how I want to make sound is changing significantly. And I think of, I think of my relationship to making music with kora in terms of like sound, really immersive soundscapes, versus like songs, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not as like linear and as straightforward. It feels more expansive and vague, and open ended in terms of like how I want to be making sound now. So I'm still exploring that.
I get that. That's exciting. I
Yeah.
look forward to hearing where you're going to go with that. And I wonder if you would be willing to share a little bit more of the kora with us at this point.
Yeah, sure. Hmm. Thank you.
So beautiful. I could listen to that all day. So beautiful. A few years ago, you did a CD.
did. I did.
Talk about it, because people are going to want to hear more of you, I think.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration behind it, and all the instrumentation and all
Yeah.
that?
I would say I don't think I quite knew this at the time, but I would say that the inspiration from the album probably has to do with my relationship to the dream world,
Mm.
which is like something that's really important in my personal life. I have a strong dreaming practice. It's something that I've studied. It's something that I want to continue to work with. Um, and I think a big part of that is, again, a few years later, finding language for it was this sense that the dreaming state is like the one space as like a Black woman where I am free, and our dreams, much like sound and movement, can have a very like utilitarian purpose, which is to liberate us from the sense of like what we think is not possible. Um, and so dreaming has just been a really important part of my life. And I knew that I wanted to create sound that felt like somebody was crossing a threshold into another way of being and seeing and existing. And sound definitely has that capacity. And so, I mean, I think at the time I was inspired by a poem, which is the Conference of Birds, and which is a Sufi poem. And I think that I was inspired by that, but I think on a more subconscious, like unconscious level, there was a sense of like, I want people to be transformed when listening to this, and I want them to have a sense of possibility and of playfulness and an imagination um, that might not be readily available to them in their physical life at this moment.
I definitely see that, and when I think about the songs that you created for that CD, it does feel, I mean, especially taken in the aggregate, very dreamlike.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
just each. Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, I think I wanted. I think I just had the dream world in mind when making that. It's something that is kind of a little bit of an obsession of mine.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Kind of like filters in even unconsciously into everything that I do.
The probably the one that has the most resonance for me, I believe it's called Farafinya
Mm, yeah,
Yekobaye.
yeah, yeah,
The whole, I mean, before I knew what you were saying, it felt like it was speaking in a certain way to me,
yeah,
as a Black woman.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, that was at a time, I'm trying to remember. I wrote that at a time where, once again there was like this massive uprisings and like in protests, and unfortunately I couldn't even tell you which time it was, because it's kind of like a Groundhog's Day, where you wake up and I'm not sure which events at that time, like incited that, but I had this feeling of like, I want to create words and sounds that celebrate like Blackness and the beauty and the darkness, and all of the things that are generated from that,
Mm-hmm.
because our skin and our culture, and even just like the color Black, like how that gets identified, or what that gets associated with, um, always seems to have this like negative context, but like it's so important, like in a very literal way, of like how we live our lives and the role that it plays. So it felt important to say that, to name that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it worked for me. It
Yeah.
was a very powerful song, and remains so.
Yeah.
What's next for you? You've got so much going on. So you say you have 2 more months
I
of your
do.
graduate work. And then?
And then, there's some really beautiful things that are transpiring. I'm not sure if I'm ready to share all of them publicly. I will tell you and call you later and tell you what's happening. But I'm going to be graduating. I'm making a really big move, which is, it's not going to be inside of the US. So that's a thing that's happening. Um, and I think honestly, um, I think what's going to be happening next is like really a reclamation of my imagination. Um, Graduate school can be amazing, and it also is like very time consuming. And I'm really feeling a need to have the time and the spaciousness to be able to dream and gestate and think about like what is really inspiring me. What do I want to do next? I know a big part of that is going to be working on a children's book, like writing and illustrating a children's book, and I have a project that I've been formulating slowly over the past few years, a music project, a small one, smaller than before, that I think is going to be different um, than what I did last time, and I think it's going to be a lot more self-produced and be playing a lot more with I don't know, just like with sound that like the voice can make, and creating soundscapes with voice as well, and more folkloric and traditional songs, maybe than original songs. So those are a few of the things that are like floating on the horizon that I'm excited to begin, um, and then I'll also be I'm kind of planting the seeds for what's going to happen with ancestral arts therapy, and what projects I can begin doing and what partnerships I can create in that as well.
Well, that all sounds really exciting and really necessary. And I'm just, uh, again, so delighted to reconnect with you and to learn what you've been up to, and a little bit more of what makes you who you are. So I really want to thank you, Zena Carlota, for participating in Dare Conversations in the Diaspora.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I adore you. I look up to you. I consider you a friend and family, and so I feel humble and honored that you invited me to share my story.
Well, it's an important story, and I'm delighted to be able to share you with people.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank our viewers for joining us today. And I want to mention also that Dare Conversations in the Diaspora is a program of the Māhealani Uchiyama Center for International Dance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering cross-cultural understanding in our community through dance and music. The African American Theater Project is supported in part by grants from the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, the San Francisco Foundation, the City of Berkeley Civic Arts Program, and also by generous donors like you. We'd like to encourage you to consider a donation of to our nonprofit by following the link on your screen. And we will be back next month on Saturday, May 1st at 2 p.m. with Dr. Rainos Mutamba, an educator, writer, and lecturer in social work who is also the founder of Ubuntu Learning Village, a hub for embodied learning around the arts, cultural reclamation, and food sovereignty in Gutu, Zimbabwe. Until then, be well, stay safe, and keep the music in your heart. Thank you.
deep pain is felt and the scars have shown what words cannot tell. They say, say you know, say you know, say you know. Say you know, say you know, say you know. Say you know, say you know, say you know. Say you know my name. All the space is fleeting just to grow into what's gone. Wonder if you're still what you are when you're alone. Can't see the shadows for the sun. I know, I know, I know, I know, I know. Say you know, say you know, say you know. Say you know, say you know, say you know. Say you know, say you know, say you know. Say you know